listening to Give Yourself Some Leeway. With me, your host, Eugene Lee. When I started this podcast, I wanted to create a safe space to talk about mental health and well-being in the workplace, to open up and be vulnerable with these emotions that not many of us talk about, to understand and become self-aware of these self-sabotaging behaviors that affect not only our professional but also our personal relationships, and how to overcome conditioned beliefs from our childhood that are holding us back in our adult lives. Today, I am joined by Dale Lykins, and after 30 years as a leader in a large church organization, Dale realized that his core values and beliefs were no longer aligned with those of the church. He decided to leave his vocation and start down his own path, true to his core values, including opening an LGBTQ safe space to question and strengthen their faith. Dale and I talk about a lot in this episode, including the importance of leading and living from your core values, how to align your beliefs and thoughts with the rest of your life, and how past traumas can influence everything. They can hold you back. They can cause you to self-sabotage, and how you can overcome these. This is a really heavy episode. We cover a lot of content, but again, this is only the start of the conversation. You can continue the discussion over at giveyourselfsomeleeway.com, on Instagram at eugene.leeway, or on the podcast page at giveyourselfsomeleeway, or you can shoot me an email at eugene@leeway.ie. As always, I love hearing from you. I love getting your feedback, and I'm always open to conversation. This is a space I wanted to create. So thank you again for listening to this episode, and I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Dale Lykins. Dale, welcome to Give Yourself Some Leeway, and thank you again so much for taking time to join the show today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, Eugene. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Dale, you've been in a leadership role for over 30 years. What was that like for you? And who is it that you serve now? And why do you do what you do? I know this is a loaded question. I have been told this many times, but it just helps me understand you that little bit better.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, there is a lot in that question. Kind of wrapping it up in succinctly as much as I can. My experience over 30 years has been mostly as a pastor in a local church. So that has, of course, built into it. Well, actually, I won't say of course, because a lot of people may not understand that. You think of a certain thing when you think of religion and the church or the pastor. It is not all about praying and wearing long flowy robes. There is a lot about leadership. I mean, that is a skill that is absolutely necessary in helping a group of people keep on the same page about their own purpose, their purpose of the organization. Plus, the church is, let's not just keep it all polished up. It is, a lot of it is corporate. And so, and I was in a situation where I had a hierarchy that, was involved a lot more than I wanted, but in my local work, in what I was doing. And so, there are goals to set, there are people to lead, and I led pretty large churches. So I had a lot of people to manage, a lot of committees, staff of, up to 18, 20 people, budgets. And so there was just all of that took most of my time. And so, I got to the point, which I know we'll talk more about in a minute, so I won't get into all of that, but got to a place after, like you said, about 30 years, which was about in 2019, so about 4 years ago, where I realized that my own values and my own kind of personal beliefs did not necessarily align with the organization. And so I left, made that decision after all that time. And so now I actually founded a faith community that I'm the lead, the founder and the leader of. And so I serve, they are mostly, the people that I serve is LGBTQ folks, families. We are an open and affirming congregation or church or a community. And also people who, like me, kind of have decided, have gotten to the point where maybe what they thought they believed all these years is not working, or they don't believe that anymore. So they're looking for a way to ask questions and to have a safe place to explore. So that's where I come from.
I love that. I think one thing as well that I can resonate a lot with back in 2019, where you said that your values and your beliefs no longer aligned with the work that you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that happens to a lot of people before they burn out. They're working in a job that no longer aligns with their core values or their
Mm-hmm.
beliefs. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why the work is so draining, because maybe they have been doing it for decades. But next
Yep.
thing they realize that there has been a culture shift, or there's been some shift somewhere, be it in the work that they do, or maybe in the company's visions or goals, and it no longer aligns with the work that they've been doing all these years. And they realize, or maybe it's just their own personal development, maybe they have changed
Mm-hmm.
and they just realize, oh, this no longer aligns with what I want to achieve my own growth and development. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to actually step up and be like, no, I'm going to leave that comfort and consistency that
Mm-hmm.
I'm used to for so long, that has been sometimes almost part of your identity. And to
Absolutely.
to actually to step out and be like, no, I'm taking this change. And what you've done there, you've created an open space, a space for discussion,
Mm-hmm.
where not only for people who are LGBT and want to also have their relationship with God, but also anyone who's open to questioning their
Mm-hmm.
faith.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, yes, I think the traditional way is that you can't really, you're not meant to question it. Definitely
Well, no, no.
in like Catholic Irish background that I have, oh, you could not question it. It's
No.
like just it's what's in the book is in the book. You better believe it.
Right. That's threatening to the organization and the institution. Yeah.
So when you said there about, let's say, your values and your beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
what's this concept of, let's say, to lead and live
Yeah.
from your core? Was it
Mm-hmm.
your core values and your core beliefs? Could you explain that concept a little bit more?
I will. And I'm going to put a little context as well, because you mentioned something about like some of the reasons one might find yourself unaligned with an organization that you are connected with. Here we're talking about employment, and it could be a culture shift or your own values change, or some things change about yourself. And Eugene, for me, it was both of those things happened. The organization's culture started to shift from the 30 years when I started in 1989. It was a very different world in the organization than, the 10 or so years before I actually decided to leave. And I saw that the organization got to a point where it was the purpose, it seemed, of the whole institution was the perpetuation of the institution, and a lot of fear about the future. And so that just is what drove them, and that led to a lot more pressure from the top down. And so that was happening, and I had some experiences that were not positive at all in that process. And also I was about 50-ish, 55 years old. And so I was just in this moment where I needed, or was just feeling that something was off, that I wasn't quite making it where I wanted to go, and I wasn't getting the organization I was leading to go where we had decided to go. And so those two things came together. So in that time, I created a space for myself by taking a leave, and then being very intentional. It was about 6 weeks, to read, to visit mentors and friends, and to spend time really reflecting on what it was I wanted to be about. What was it that was my own desires for the rest of my life kind of thing. So, and through that is when I then came to have some more clarity around what it was that I was about, and so, um, and it took a lot of effort really to discover what was off. So before I could really say, what about leading from the core, for me, discovering the core was really difficult. Okay, so I, took counseling, and it took, a lot of work to figure out that, for me, it came from some past childhood trauma that I had pushed down so far. And so once, I could kind of deal with that and think about it, I could be more, I kind of had more of and at least an understanding of why I was in the place that I was. So,
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, taking that first step to
mm-hmm,
actually do the work or to even be aware that their work needs to be done. I
mm-hmm,
think a lot
yeah,
of people, when it comes to counseling or therapy, they're like, oh no, I know that's opening a black box that I don't want to open. But you need, if anything, there's probably a lot of escapism happening in the background, or there's a
mm-hmm,
lot of ways that it's affecting your life that you aren't aware of. But
mm-hmm,
I think sometimes it takes either hitting a rock bottom, which we wish people could avoid that pain, if at all possible. But sometimes there's just a lot of tension, or again, just this misalignment in everything that you do, and you're like, something's not right here. What do I need to do to change?
mm-hmm,
And often getting counseling or talking to someone, getting professional help is a good starting point. Be it even one conversation can help bring up a lot, and help you be more aware of what's okay and what's not okay.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so absolutely. And again, that led, I had been working about 10 years before that moment with a leadership coach, who's now just become a great friend of mine, but she's been through a lot with me. So, but I was in a particular church. This was the last two that I was a part of, um, where the leadership, when I got there, was really ready, and I'm talking about, like the board, board of directors, however you want to think of that, uh, were really ready to go to another place. Like the church had just been doing what it does all the time, and they were ready to get involved more in the community and to open up their own view of the world, and what their purpose was to be broader and to be really about people who were not part of their own congregation. And so the leadership was ready to go. We thought all that you needed to do to help other people kind of be part of this dreaming, visioning process. And we made some decisions, kind of shared them with everybody. And it just became this huge point of conflict. I mean, it just exploded. And so there was a lot of pushback, and a lot of it was directed at me because I'm the face, of what's happening in the organization. I think anyone who might be in the top management, doesn't have to be the top management, don't get me wrong, but that for sure gets a lot of, the blame or the focus of any discontent. And we knew that this was kind of in any kind of organization, any change like that is going to take time, and some conflict is necessary because it's necessary at times to break down old patterns of operating. There were some very unhealthy ways that this place had been for a long time. And so the next place I went, some similar things happened, and it was, just really difficult. And so that's a part of that leading as well, from like who you know yourself to be, and to be sure that you are following, what's, I don't want to say right, but um, what's been agreed upon by everybody, and that you're all in, and can kind of, when all that stuff comes at you that's negative, and sometimes it's personal, to be able not to get that wrapped up in yourself, that it's just change, and people are just angry, and they're hurt, they're afraid, and what I discovered, Eugene, through my counseling and all that, is that I was afraid and angry and anxiety, not because of what was happening in the organization, but those were just things inside of me that, from what I had experienced. I was abused as a kid, and had never really gone to the place to like look at that, and to express, what that did to me. So I was carrying that around, and so I had a huge people pleasing part of myself. And I'm not saying we shouldn't try to please people, and be kind. Kindness is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about in an unhealthy way of just constantly making sure that everybody's okay, and that if they're not, that's my responsibility. And and I had fear, and I had self-doubt, and people would say to me, you like, after they hear my story, they'd be like, you didn't seem that way, and that was very true. I could lead, I could make tough decisions, I could stand my ground at times, but that was what was going on inside of me. No one knew, but that was causing this like exhaustion, and all the energy that it took was not helping. It did not contribute to me being in the best place to be able to, rally the troops and go forward as an organization to the place that we, had put out in our vision, and our core values is where we wanted to be. So I'll keep talking if you want, but I will check in with you.
Yeah, no, you covered a lot there, especially
Yeah, I
those
did.
those self-sabotaging tendencies. You've covered
Yeah.
a lot there with people pleasing and self-doubt. These are things that come up a lot, especially with leadership burnout.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to influence and lead other people, and you're trying to please them all the time,
Yes, all
at
at the
the
same time. Yeah.
expense of your own energy and your own health.
Yeah.
And how can you show up as your best self to serve everyone else if you don't take care of yourself first?
Mm-hmm.
I think it
Yeah.
comes up. A lot of people always use the fill your own cup first before
Right.
you fill into anyone else's cup. And I think that is something when you've got this high achieving mindset, or you're a leader, or you're trying to influence others, or you're trying to, let's say, carry the burden, carry the weight of the
Mm-hmm.
world on your shoulders. And often that's because you're trying to fill a hole, or fill a wound.
Mm-hmm.
And as you've explained yourself as well, you were trying to fill in that childhood trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and you're taking on this, or trying to, let's say, make up for this past trauma
Mm-hmm.
by over serving or over expending yourself, again at your own expense, to try
Right.
and serve others. And even where other people didn't see it the way you did, it's your own negative self narrative that
Yes.
always
Right.
puts you down, even though
Right.
you were showing up to your full potential.
Yes, that self-narrative was part of the um, uh, coping mechanisms that I had developed even early as a child, and had just become part of who I was. The situation, though, as an adult, they weren't serving me any longer, though, because I wasn't in the same situation. But it felt like it at times, or my body kind of carried that trauma. And so it would just kick immediately into those, defense mechanisms or those coping skills that had gotten me to the age of 55 and pretty successfully. But began to have a negative impact. I would, as a result of a lot of that, I can think of one example in particular. Well, I won't go one example. I'll say one person is in the last place that I was serving and leading, and I had a pretty high-profile staff person who'd been there, a bit longer than I had been, and I kind of, began to give her more and more responsibility and trust in my circle, and began finally, well, let me say this. She would, and I noticed this, like I would have an idea, and then she would have a little different take on it. And what I found myself often saying, like going with how she wanted to implement it or to shift it, which wasn't quite where I wanted to be. It would, I thought this is going to take longer. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but I hear what she's saying. So, okay. And, there is some give and take that should happen in leadership and in these roles. But what I'm talking about, though, is that I did this all the time. It didn't matter what it was. So I would call that kind of like, giving away my voice, giving away even my power of the role that I had in the organization. So, here I had been there like 6 years, and we were still trying to get, like to just make some changes that just were really difficult. And I finally, during that leave that I took, that relationship, that staff person was on my list because I knew there was something there that needed to shift, and it was probably going to be me that needed to kind of know what that was and implement it, of course. And so I realized that, what was happening to me was also happening with other people that she was working with. And so the whole organization was really being, I'm going to use the word manipulated, and I was allowing that to happen because I was too. But that comes from my past as well. That's a thing that came from the abuse, and that my abusers manipulated me so that I would be quiet and, and be, just kind of stay in the situation. Well, I didn't have a choice not to, but they could just continue the unhealthy situation that we had. So anyway, but I wasn't aware of that, until, like I said, at this point in my life, I was like, this, why do I keep doing that? It was just, through some reading and other things, I had just kind of come to this place that something there was off. So when I came back from the renewal leave, let me say, I got to go back one more thing. Right before the renewal leave, there was a small group of folks who were working on some, a direction that was going to be pretty significant, and putting some details to that and process to it. And we had it in good shape, but there was some things they were going to work on while I was gone, like 2 or 3 things. And when I got back, this person was so excited to share with me what they had been working on. And they had this whole presentation 2 days, after I came back, and we had our meeting, and they unrolled this whole different thing that was nothing like we had talked about. So, at that point, then, I had just gotten to the place where I could deal with that a bit better, a lot better. And so I pushed back about that. And it was kind of the beginning of the end, because for her, because, well, me too, actually, or the beginning of the beginning for me. she wasn't used to it, and I had allowed it. And so when I first, started to say, no, we're not doing it that way, because that's not what we had agreed to, and I left, and now here we are at this point, and this is not going to fly. And so it just started confrontation after confrontation of what behavior had been toxic to the whole system. When I started to confront it, or to at least say no to it, or to stand my ground about, no, this is what we've decided, and this is what we're going to do. In other words, I was saying, not you, the one person, but the whole is, the whole organization is what's going to be the focus here. So anyway, I hope that made some sense in what I was, but
Yes.
trying to explain a particular situation. And that's just one of many where I kind of gave away my own role because of my fear and anxiety and all, and people pleasing and all of that. So
Yes, exactly. You kind of hit the nail on the head there with people pleasing.
mm-hmm.
And when you came back after realizing all of this people pleasing that you had been doing, and this person got very, let's say, offended, or they
Mm-hmm.
got kind of struck back by the fact that you had set a boundary now,
Yes, that's
because
exactly
they had understood that the relationship was, oh, you always agree with what I say, and you
mm-hmm.
and they kind of expected that people pleasing from you. Not
Right.
that they knew it was always people pleasing, but they probably
Right.
had this mental image of it. They visualize it as, oh, everything I say, Dale
Mm-hmm.
always takes it into the highest respect and always agrees with everything I have to say. He's
Yeah.
going to love this presentation, and he's not
Yes.
going to disagree with it. And as soon as you disagree, there's like, okay, there's something wrong here. Something
Right.
happened when he was away, and he doesn't like me anymore, or something like that. And that
Yeah.
was, let's say, the visualization that they were having. That was the
Right.
deflection that they had.
Yeah.
And I think that happens to a lot of people when it comes to when they start setting boundaries where they haven't had boundaries before. Let's say it's something like you come over to your friend's house and they always have a messy house, and you're like, okay, and you start maybe cleaning up their house every time you visit. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to sweep the floor or do a bit of hoovering or maybe wash the dishes or something while we have a cup of tea, and or have a coffee or something.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
next thing they kind of expect is like, oh, every time Eugene calls around, the floor will be swept or the dishes will be done, so I'll leave them for when Eugene calls over. And next thing,
Right.
over time, you realize, hang on a second, this isn't
Yes.
right. I'm expending myself here because I thought I was helping them out, and now they expect it of me. And then you set the boundaries, like, you know what, I'm not calling over just to clean your house. And next
Mm-hmm.
thing they go, okay, well, I'm not making you a coffee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And next thing you realize, okay, there was definitely something that was expected, or there's a resentment going on here, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not, let's say, a deflection of who you are as a person. It's like, okay, we need to communicate better,
Right.
and we have to, yes, when you come to that realization, you set the boundary. I think it's important to help the other person understand where you are
Yes.
coming from. And sometimes
Absolutely.
they can get on the defensive because they're like, okay, you're changing the dynamics of the relationship here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's like there must be something wrong. What
Right.
happened to you? Why are you changing this? Everything was perfect before you left. And
Right. Yes. I
and now
was
you
getting everything I wanted.
yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I did, and again, this is just one example of several I could tell that were similar, but and with this situation, we did have some of those conversations about, this is why, and this is what's been happening, but that can't happen anymore. And then it was for the next year. Well, was it? Yeah. Well, months. It was just, everything began to be just like that, just this pushback on their part. Now, in that situation, I was their employer and boss. So, there was only so much of that I could explain for them to accept. I mean, there's only so many different ways I could, try to help them get it. It's like, this is the way, we're going to be. I'm setting these boundaries, and this is why. It was really rough. It was rough.
I think it's when you're in that leadership role and you're trying to change the dynamics of the business, and
Mm-hmm.
especially when people are not, or when people are resistant to that change, when they've gotten so comfortable with, oh, this is the way things have always been, and next thing
Mm-hmm.
you come back and you see things with a completely new lens, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, these changes need to be made, and that's often going to be met with a lot of
Yeah.
resistance.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you're trying to, sometimes, again, this is something that I've come across a lot on the podcast, is when you're trying to change the culture for the better,
Mm-hmm.
but people are resistant because they don't want to change the way things are, even if it's a very negative or a burnout culture, and they just got comfortable. They're like, look, I do the bare minimum, and I might not be too happy with the way things are, but the discomfort of changing the dynamics
Yes.
of what's going on right now is more uncomfortable than just putting
Right.
up with the small things on the day to day.
Yes, and I think that um, on some level as well, even though people tend not to be aware enough to say that, there are people who benefit though from the culture in the unhealthy way that it is, and so there's power dynamics that go on, and there are people who are not in formal roles. And I'm coming from a person who works with a nonprofit, so there are people who are paid and I'm their boss. That's one dynamic. And then there's a whole volunteerism too, because nobody has to show up when the church did anything. So there's all of that too with that kind of an organization. But you have people then who are not in formal roles of leadership. They've not been elected to a board position, they have not on a committee. They're important as a part of the community, but not making those decisions on a daily basis. And they are often, it doesn't have to be them. I shouldn't have just acted like that was the only thing. Sometimes there are people who are in positions of some sort of power, of a role of leadership, like this one staff person I was just mentioning. So either way, though, the unhealthy culture can benefit people and give them power, or they have assumed that power, or they may be the person who is always kind of, like I think she was, redirecting, so that things come out the way they want. And people have learned to let that happen. My leadership coach calls it dancing the dance. And when you are the person who, like you were talking about, setting up a boundary. So think of it like this too. You're going to step out of the dance that's always been danced. It's like, I'm not dancing anymore. This is not good for me, and it's not good for the organization. I'm not dancing anymore. We got to find another dance. And the person who's just still dancing the same dance is like, wait a minute, because they know if they step this way, someone's going to be right there to step that way, and then when that stops, they are just really not sure what to do. So another thing that goes along with that, is that I had heard before and been taught that change equals loss. And so people are often just, wrapped up in the grief of that, and people handle loss in different ways. Some get, lash out and get angry, like I mentioned earlier at the other place that I was at, and you never know how that's going to be until it happens and you're in the middle of it. And so if you are not sure of your own self, have a strength within you that you are able to hold on to during those times, you're going to be tossed. I mean, I had to, just, that's the only image that came to mind, just tossed around from place to place, person to person, um, you know, just, trying to figure out where you even fit, even though you're the, you should be the person who's leading. So
One thing you covered there that's definitely worth another mention is when you change and people see it as a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Recently, I went through my own changing my own career, complete career change, because uh, as you said, my last career, almost a decade long, it just no longer aligned with my values and my beliefs. And as soon as I stepped up, as soon as I stopped dancing the dance and I started speaking up and setting my own boundaries, people were straight up to be like, "You have so much. You're going to lose so much by stepping out of this career. You're going to
Mm-hmm.
lose your
Yeah.
pension. You're going to lose this. You're going to lose security. All this."
Right.
And I was like, "Yeah, but I might be happy, and
Yes.
I might actually enjoy the work I do on a day-to-day basis. I might actually feel fulfilled."
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I stepped out of my career without having a job lined up. I
Mm-hmm.
just knew that the work that I was doing at the time wasn't fulfilling me in the way that it used to.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
Right.
nothing against the company I worked for. It was something that I knew that it was something in myself that had changed.
Yeah.
When I had burnt out, it had been for a reason. I had to figure out what that reason was. It took me a while. It took me about
Mm-hmm.
3 years to
Mm-hmm.
finally realize what that was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I tried to go on a journey to try and figure out why exactly that was
Mm-hmm.
and what needed to change in order for me to find that purpose and fulfillment again. And when I finally made that step to stop dancing the dance and make a sudden career change as it looked to everyone else, they were like, "Oh, you have so much to lose if you leave right now. You're
Right.
losing all the security. You're losing this. Look what you've built over the past 10 years. You're going to lose out and all that." And I was like, "Yes, but what if I step out and see the bigger picture,
Mm-hmm.
I see something that I wouldn't have seen before if I just stuck my head in the dirt and for another 10 years. What if?" And
Yeah.
it was a what if, instead of looking from a place of scarcity, being what if you lose everything here by making a change. I was like, what if I make a change here and it's a change for the better?
Right.
And for some people, again, once I stopped dancing that dance, it made them more aware of it too. Because I took my head out of the dirt. They were like, "You know what? Maybe I should think about that too. You know what? That's a very brave call. Maybe I should think
Mm-hmm.
twice about what I do. Maybe I should start setting boundaries." And sometimes it takes someone to step up and take action to
Mm-hmm.
create that ripple effect. Just not that everyone else around you is going to start leaving their jobs and making change, making big change, but just to help them become more self-aware. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what it all boils down to at the end of the day. It's trying to get everyone to be more self-aware of why they work, what work they do, why they
Mm-hmm.
work, what their core values and beliefs are. And I think a lot of people throw that around all the time. What they're like, "Oh, it doesn't stand for my values." But when you ask them what their values are, they kind of stop for a minute. So, uh, not trying to put you on the spot, but what are your core values and beliefs still?
Well, I think I can do that. So the things that I thought about that when I left, of course I did. And there were two that forced yeah, that pushed me or that led me really to leave what I was doing. And that was that the organization that I was in, the denomination, was not inclusive completely for LGBTQ people. And I knew, I mean, it had just been something that had been part of, you know, discussions for so long and decisions and votes and all of this. And I was just tired of it. I said, I want to live the rest of my life um, not only welcoming everybody, but celebrating who they are in community. I want to marry who I want to marry. I want to just be, you know, if I'm going to do that in the rest of, you know, in the future. And that was a huge part of it. The other was the institution itself. like I said, was so focused on its own preservation that I began to realize that so much, not all, so much of what I had done in the last 30 years was along that same same track, was to just get people to come here, so they could participate in everything that we're doing, and this institution would kind of become the center of our lives. And so I so my from the core of all of that, I my mind, I'm not going blank because I don't know. That's so funny. I just had the moment. So I did not believe any longer that Christianity itself is the only way that had any value in the spiritual world. I believed in the value and worth of every person. I believe in, I also found the institution to be very shaming. And so shame is something that I just work against now. It's part of who I am and what I do. I also wanted to be sure that what I am doing contributes to people's well-being. And so those are just kind of some of the things that drive me. And I began to realize that those things were not what I was spending most of my time doing. So.
And as a leader, do you feel that that was, let's say, very conflicting, that because you're in a leadership role in that organization, that sometimes when people are as an employee, they're like, okay, I'm just going to ride the wave and wait until everything hits the fan and then leave. But when you're in that leadership role, you feel like you have an active part in that company's or that organization's vision. So does that make you question your core beliefs and values even more?
Yeah, what happened in my situation was that I started about, 5 or 6 years before I left to actually begin to organize my own work around some of those things. And there were people who were coalescing with that. And it did not, people in the hierarchy, my own supervisors and folks who were kind of above me started to really pressure me to not be that way, like to fall in line and to only walk a certain way. I'm using that as a metaphor, but just not speak about those things, not do that sort of. They would talk in group meetings about innovation, and dreaming out of the box, and being fresh expressions of how we're going to be together as this, as the church, or in my situation. But when you got out of that box, if it wasn't, it was kind of like out of one box into their other box is what they were looking for. And I just, and that was part of the pressure on me to say, I do not want to be part of this anymore because of, the way the corporate culture was.
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of people, sometimes they get sucked into the vision of a company. They see the branding, and they see the what's in the public eye, and they're like, oh, I love how green and how like inclusive diversity and all of these like big buzzwords the companies use for to bring people in. And next thing you finally get into it, and you're like, oh, this place is a complete mess, or this
Yes.
place does not care about me. I'm just another
Mm-hmm.
number.
Mm-hmm.
And next thing they're like, oh, but it pays the bills, and they just shrug their shoulders and say, I'll get on with it.
That's
And
right.
next thing you realize, but there's so much opportunity out there.
Yeah.
I think that, and that was one thing I was doing when I was, again, job searching, that
Hmm.
I was looking for those companies that were aligned with their vision. And then when I went for an interview, I was asking questions that the interviewers just weren't comfortable with. Like, I'd ask what one of the main questions I asked when I was being interviewed was, I asked the interviewers what gets them excited about work in the morning, and they were kind of taken aback, and they were like, "Well, sure, it's work, like." And next thing I was like, "Okay, you," and straight up, sorry, that was very Irish of me. But again, it was something that was they just didn't have that. Let's say maybe I was looking for that excitement or vision or something that I expected. Let's say maybe a leader should have some drive. And if they, in the interview, if they're interviewing someone, they want them to join the team, and they just shrug their shoulders and they're like, "Oh, work is work," not,
Right.
"Oh, I look forward to working with my team towards a common
Hmm.
goal every day."
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
if it was a little bit rehearsed, but as soon as I got an honest answer that was like, it is what it is,
Hmm.
I was like, okay, then I don't see myself working here for the next 10 years, until
Hmm.
I finally landed an interview where the manager and, let's say, the interviewers were very open and very kind of motivated about, and very clear about what they wanted.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, I like what this team's vision is,
Right.
and I'd like to see where this goes. It really piqued my interest, and I think that's what a lot of people should look for in their work. I know some people, they like to sit in the background, but I
Hmm.
feel that in order to feel motivated in your work, you need to find a team as that is aligned with your goals and beliefs too. And again, as you said there, as soon as you realized you were no longer aligned with what the organization had in mind, then it was your time to step out.
Yes, I needed to find, like, be authentic to what I
Yes.
was, who I was and was becoming, and the kind of expansion that was happening in my own self. Yeah. So
So when it came to, again, you had, let's say, counseling and therapy for
mhm.
becoming more self-aware. Were there any other external factors or activities that helped you to become more aware of yourself?
Yes, well, I mentioned coaching. If that's the kind of thing you're referring to, yes, I've worked with a coach for many years. Gosh, probably 15 or so. And then counseling, and a spiritual director I had, which, for me, was a part that I added that was really helpful. Um, and and yes, that was that. And actually, I went through. My pause was, I was thinking, well, voice therapy too, but I don't know if that's another whole podcast. But so, it kind of started in that land, with that as well, because I ended up sick and then couldn't talk and went to voice therapy. And what I was asked to do, Eugene, is really what prompted me to take the counseling, or the coaching and the spiritual direction I was doing anyway. But when I was being asked in the voice therapy to be able to do the exercises to relax certain muscles in my throat or my chest or my shoulders, and or to do certain things with my breath, like deep breaths, and I couldn't do it. I mean, it was very difficult, and I realized how tense I was holding my body. And that's when I thought, there is something more that I've always known. I've been a tense person, but I didn't know how deep it went. And then I went back to counseling, and because I'd also had those memories of the abuse that started to kind of pop up, and did some exploring with that. So that just took that, kind of to the other level. So all those things together were really instrumental in that point in my life. So
I do like the fact that you mentioned the voice therapy there,
okay.
because I know a lot of people that have felt, let's say, they're like, oh, I've lost my voice. It even happens to me about 2 years ago, where like I used to love singing all the time. I was in
Hmm.
musical theater. I used to play guitar and sing a lot. And next thing, about 2 years ago, I just completely lost my voice.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, I completely lost my range. And so then, of course, I stopped singing because I did not like the fact that I didn't have my range anymore.
Right.
And next thing I realized that, and it took me a while, that the reason that my voice was being caught was the fact that I was holding back a lot of things that I
Hmm.
wanted to say
Yeah.
for fear of offending other people.
Yes.
And it wasn't until I started podcasting that it actually started to come back,
Okay.
because I was like, okay, I need to speak up a bit more. And as soon as I started
Hmm.
becoming more outspoken, I was like, okay, my voice is becoming a lot deeper and clearer again. I'm
Yeah.
being more articulate. And
Hmm.
then I came across a really interesting podcast. I can't remember the guest name. I'm definitely going to have to look him up again. But to be honest, I'd love to have a conversation with him, because what he said, and he was doing an interview, but also going through body language with the podcast host. And he said,
Hmm.
I can hear that you're feeling a bit caught up here. Now, I want you to tell yourself that um, I speak my truth, and my truth deserves to be spoken. I was something
Mm.
along those lines. And as soon as he
Yes.
said it, you could hear that all the tension came
Yes.
out of his
Absolutely.
voice. And he
Yeah.
was like, oh, I'm speaking so much clearer now. So when
Right.
I started podcasting, then I was like, all I can speak is my own experience. I can
Yeah.
speak my own truth. And people can criticize it. Again, that's their own personal opinion. But I can speak
Right.
from my own opinion. It's my own voice.
Hmm.
And I choose to speak freely.
Hmm.
And it was just that, something as simple as that. So just saying it out loud, and just reframing it that way, being like, I'm
Hmm.
holding a lot of tension here in my neck and in my chest. And by choosing to just speak freely, it just released all that tension. So
Hmm.
maybe that was something that you did cover in your voice therapy, but
Oh,
it's something that, again, it goes to a much deeper level than
yeah.
just the physical tension.
Yes, absolutely. Because there's a big difference between forcing your voice out your mouth from your throat and relaxing yourself because you're confident in what you've got to say and you're okay that you also know that you need to say it and that you can speak it just like you said, and it coming from that place in you, which is way deeper, you know um and just that everything else kind of it gets out of the way so that the voice can come out unrestricted. That's what I learned in voice therapy. And that's and the difficulty I had to do in doing that is what put me, sent me back to do counseling yet again in my life. So
Awesome. So, Dale, if there's anyone that wants to get in touch with you and learn more about your space for discussion, or if you're coaching, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So yes, I coach. I have my memoir out where I talk a lot about this, and I have do a podcast called the Unlearning Blog. I'm sorry, that's my blog. My podcast is Hear It From Me. All of that you can access and discover on my website. So it's really simple, DaleLykins.com,
I
and
love that.
you'll find it all.
Again, one thing I do want to mention about the Unlearning blog is something that we did cover there around overcoming those conditioned beliefs that we have
Yeah.
from our childhood. And it's
Right.
something that we carry on through life. And this is something that I have brought up time and time again, is these conditioned beliefs that we have. And of course, we just covered in the episode. But again, that is something that you cover a lot in the
Yeah.
Unlearning blog. So that was something that I really respected when I came across it.
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of just unlearning to make room for, the new things for you. Yeah. It's pretty cool. As a matter of fact, when you asked me about my core values, my hesitation was my mind, the way it worked, went back to my very first blog, which was in 2020. And I wrote like a list of what I now believe. And it tripped me up because there's like 8 things on it. And I can't remember them all. So but people can go look for themselves. No.
Awesome, brilliant. Dale, again, it's such a good time having a conversation with you again, and I really look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you, Eugene. I'm glad we found each other to be able to do this.